Every year, MLK Day comes around, and there are a cacophony of eulogies, statements, articles, all kind of things that are made in the press and by people who are both self-professed admirers of King and people who had disagreements with King, who seemingly come together to sort of admire his sort of universal affection. And I find that quite inspiring. I find that quite endearing. And I think it's one of the best things about living in a country like America, a pluralistic nation that understands and recognizes that we can all have our own differences, but we're united under a core set of principles. And that core set of principles it's intractable. It's not negotiable. These are not things that can be amended away with a sort of cultural relativism, a sort of multiculturalism. These are principles that make America what it is. And I genuinely believe that America is one of the few countries, if not the only country, its principles rather, that could produce a like Dr. King. When I think about Dr. King, I think about a few things. I think about a man who was scholarly, who was sagacious, who had a deep understanding of the moral foundations of the American experiment, and had a particular, unique way of applying those moral foundations to his broader thinking. I think of a man who had a righteous fire within him towards causes that he genuinely believed in. I think of a man who was complex, complicated, a man who was a man of the cloth, a man of God, but at the same time also fell into several personal infidelities that tarnished his image in the eyes of some, but in the eyes of others, redeemed him as a sort of fallible human like all of us, demoted him from his God status, but still kept him at a level of respect. I think of all kind of things when I think of Dr. King. But what I don't like, and this is a tendency that conservatives, people on my side of the aisle, have a very bad tendency to do, they tend to lift Dr. King up almost as if he is a divine figure. And they cling on particularly to one core phrase that he said in a very long speech that is now his most famous speech, the I Have a Dream speech, that we should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And yet, like all cliches, that one phrase has so much packed into it that is not captured by a simple retelling or a simple utterance of it. What does it mean to be treated on the basis of the content of your character? What is character truly? How do we determine what good moral character is? All of these questions, and there are plenty of more questions that phrase evokes, are far more important, in my opinion, than the fact that Dr. King uttered a phrase that a lot of us agree on. And yet cliches rule the day. Cliches rule the day, and cliches have a way of destroying our ability to think, our ability as human beings to think. I say in my title that this is a conservative's reflections on Dr. King and MLK Day because I am someone who believes that the tradition of American conservatism, properly understood, actually embodies a lot of the principles of the civil rights movement. American conservatism is not simply about conserving the old ways. It's about conserving the universal and ensuring the universal does not fall prey to the local, to the sort of ravagings of, the passions. As the great William F. Buckley said, conservatism stands athwart history and says stop. Now, this is a very docile position in which the person is simply acting as a sort of intermediary. They're just saying stop. They're not really proposing anything, but the conservative tradition actually has a lot of things that it does propose. It proposes that we all follow in submission to a universal moral order, which is reflected in our Constitution's principles. It proposes that we take heed to how things have been done and do not be so quick to discard those things when a new shiny object comes around. It proposes many different things. And I believe that King referenced many of those things in his work. King referenced the people who sat in during the Civil Rights Movement, who sat in different restaurants, who wouldn't serve black folks. They just sat in and they didn't order anything, which eventually provoked a change in the hearts, or at least in the activities of the people discriminating against them. He described them as basically being, and I paraphrase, inheritors of the work of the Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers. Now, Dr. King was a proponent of social justice. He had a lot of leftist ideals. So I'm not going to pretend as if he was some kind of dyed-in-the-wool, laissez-faire, classical liberal. He was not. As much as I would hope that more people would follow that tradition, he was certainly not. But what he was someone who understood that the American tradition is sturdy, it is sound, and even if it is not lived up to in the local, the universal still has very much to tell us. That kind of discourse, when it comes to much in our country, when it comes to race especially, has been woefully discarded by the activists, by the postmodern activists that have taken control over America's core institutions, taken control over the medical field, over universities, over education, over everything, over in certain sectors of the government, over everything. Shortly after the Civil Rights Movement left its prime, a new pernicious field of study called critical race theory, which many of you are quite familiar with, came about. And the core contention of critical race theorists was that the civil rights movement was actually insufficient. It didn't go far enough because the civil rights movement had an emphasis on racial equality. Now, my friends, equality simply means treating everyone according to the same moral standard. Not the same standard in general, the same moral standard. Because when we're all treated according to the same moral standard, i.e. the principle of justice, which is the principle of ensuring that man is not wrong, he keeps what is in rightful possession of his own self and things of that sort. When that standard is universal and is upheld, distinctions like categories and race and class, they become secondary. They don't matter as much anymore because they are lesser considerations. Because all of us are subject to justice, but not all of us are subject to being a certain identity characteristic or being a part of a certain oppressed group or what have you, so-called oppressed group. And so it is obviously preferable for us to prefer universal ideas over particular ones if those universal ideas can allow us to create a better society and have more stringent standards. But so the critical race theorists said that equality was the problem because it actually ignored the depth of the racial problem. And the racial problem, they would go on to say, has nothing to do, or very little to do with racial equality, and everything to do with systems of power, power structures. You see, according to the critical race theorists, the problem of the civil rights movement was that they didn't focus enough on understanding racism as a manifestation of power, and instead they looked at racism as a manifestation of a certain moral outlook, and by doing that, they ignored the extent of the problem, according to the critical race theorists. There are some people like Derek Bell who helped develop critical race theory, who advocated for separate society. He advocated against integration. And there are plenty of people who are proponents of critical race theory who are sympathetic to those kind of arguments. And that mentality has taken hold of the current discourse around race in America. Certain disparities as it relates to race in America are no longer seen as caused by a multivariate number of causes. No, they are instead seen as indisputable proof of racism. The fact that there may be a racial wealth gap is seen as an indisputable proof of racism as opposed to habit and conditions of individuals and their own actions. The fact that black women tend to die in childbirth more than white women is seen as an indisputable fact of racism as opposed to a fact that black women tend to have access to hospitals that are not as high quality, and when you control for the access to hospitals they have, they actually survive just as much time as white women do. All these things, all these different causes and solutions are excluded in pursuit of one single idea. The whole of the racial conversation in America has been reduced to one single idea. And not only that, that's just the foundation of the problem. The structure of the problem, because all foundations give way to structures. A building's foundation gives way to the structure of the building. Without the foundation, the building can't stand. The structure of the problem is now that upon that foundation, you can therefore accuse certain people of being racist on the behest of having a different opinion than you. You can assert the power of your identity group over others in social conversation and then cancel them if they don't agree with you because, again, you've built it on this false structure. The problem went up from claiming that racism is a matter of power, not intent, and then translating that into the experiences of certain groups, adopting a collectivist mindset as opposed to an individualist one, the individualist mindset being the one that is truer and more proper to reality and proper thinking, and then the conclusion being grievance politics, the conclusion being a pernicious form of cancel culture, the conclusion being this whole range of neologisms being created to describe racial grievance, like microaggressions and silence being violence if you don't speak up in favor of black people and representation. All of this stuff comes from an accursed foundation. A foundation that was distinctively different from the one that King believed. Whether you actually agree with King's political positions or not, King was a leftist. There are plenty of things I don't agree with. I saw someone say, well, King was a communist. So was Nelson Mandela. A lot of people who did impactful things were believers of false ideas. But that does not negate the impactful things they did. As a conservative, I strongly adhere to the ideas that were birthed in the tradition of the American founders. I strongly adhere to natural law, natural rights, self-governance, popular sovereignty. I strongly adhere to the sanctity of the rational mind and its ability to understand the world and discern certain principles in the world without which we cannot live life whatsoever. I strongly adhere to the importance of beauty to society. I strongly adhere to the importance of social cohesion to a flourishing society, and I strongly adhere to the fundamental principle of society, a respect for an individual's sovereign will, so long as that sovereign will is not corrosive to the lives of others. This is a bedrock of principles that can be applied to any issue, whether it be race, foreign policy, what have you. And yet, right now, this sort of rich conception of debate and political conversation has just faded away to endless shrill screeches about microaggressions and victimhood and commodification and how people touching your hair is somehow heresy and it's racism and lived experience being the guide of ascertaining truth as opposed to reason being the guide of ascertaining truth. All of these new ideas emerge from one rotten foundation. And on this MLK Day, I encourage all of you to think, is this rotten foundation actually building on the ideas that are demonstrably proven throughout history and through the deduction of our powers of reason to promote human flourishing? Or are they corrosive to that effect? I argue the latter. And on this MLK Day, instead of slavishly praising King as this paragon of virtue, instead of attaching moral significance to a person as opposed to universal ideals, instead of devolving into a talking point discussion of the race problem in America, and instead of simply saying the left is crazy or these people who say these ideas are crazy, I encourage all of you to go out and begin to understand these different perspectives. I encourage all of you to attach significance to universal ideas, not individual people who happen to have a lot of social clout. And I encourage all of you to be lifelong thinkers in the tradition of individualism, in the tradition of objective truth. And even if you end up disagreeing with me entirely, that's great, because at least you have a proper mechanism by which you can discern if I'm wrong or not. A mechanism that goes outside of yourself, is not based on your narrow experience, and can, if used by other people, lead to a more enriching social discourse. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, if you want to support my operation, please be sure to donate to me on my PayPal. Please be sure to comment on this video, like this video, share this video. Please be sure to also most certainly join my Discord. We love conversations. We love discussions. My friends, have a good rest of your week or weekend whenever you're watching this. Remember MLK Day as a time for reflection, not a time for slavish adulation. And most importantly, my friends, forever and eternally, I want you to do one thing for me. Stay pensive, my friends. God bless. Bye.